The closing bell has just sounded on Wall Street, and it was a day where the headlines were louder than the indices. I'm Grant Mercer, this is Storm Stock Solutions, and we're here to keep some clarity through the chaos of these markets. Let's start with the tone of the session. Equities were mixed and choppy, with traders caught between micro stories and single names, and some big-picture uncertainty around tariffs and policy. It wasn't a runaway risk-on or risk-off day. It felt more like a positioning day ahead of a heavy stretch of politics and policy in Washington. On the upside, one of the clearest winners was in something many Americans know well: pizza. According to reporting from MarketWatch, Domino's shares rallied after a solid earnings report and a strong sales beat. The CEO pushed back on a recent narrative that consumers are pulling back from pizza, saying it's just not true that people are eating less. What matters for the tape is that the quick-service pizza category still looks healthy for Domino's, even while some rivals have been showing weakness. Traders will see that as a sign that, despite tighter budgets, certain value-focused, convenience-driven consumer names can still put up growth if they execute. On the flip side, healthcare, specifically Medicare Advantage, was an area to handle with care. A MarketWatch piece highlighted that the once blistering growth in Medicare Advantage slowed in 2026. Some plans have been exiting unprofitable markets and trimming extra benefits. For investors, that raises questions about margins and growth assumptions for insurers heavily exposed to this space. When a high-growth segment in healthcare hits a speed bump, the market starts to reprice what had been seen as a steady secular tailwind. This is one of those themes that looks fragile and could inject more volatility into managed care stocks if the trend continues. Now let's talk about some of the stories that defined the broader risk mood. In crypto, MarketWatch notes that spot Bitcoin ETFs have seen roughly $4.3 billion in outflows over the past 5 weeks. That's a meaningful reversal of the inflow surge that helped legitimize Bitcoin for a lot of traditional investors. When you see that kind of money pulling out, it tells you sentiment is shifting from fear of missing out to show me the next catalyst. Traders in that space will be watching whether Bitcoin can stabilize technically, and whether policy or macro headlines give the asset class a new narrative, or whether more de-risking is ahead. Stepping back to macro and policy, tariffs and trade were front and center. One MarketWatch op-ed argues that Congress needs to move on President Trump's proposed tariffs relatively quickly to avoid what's described as a massive revenue cliff for the federal budget, with less than 150 days for lawmakers to decide. Another piece talks about a tariff ruling that's already sparking what's being called refund chaos for small businesses and families, underscoring how unpredictable trade policy can ripple through real economy balance sheets. For markets, this mix is important. On one hand, new or extended tariffs can mean higher costs for importers, potential margin pressure for manufacturers and retailers, and possible second-round effects on inflation. On the other, uncertainty around the rules of the game makes it harder for businesses to plan, which tends to weigh on risk appetite. Investors will be watching for clarity out of Congress and the administration, because a more stable, predictable trade framework tends to support higher multiples, while headline risk around tariffs usually keeps valuations in check. We also have a political overlay coming into focus. According to MarketWatch, President Trump is expected to lean into the high cost of living in his upcoming State of the Union address, with a review of what he's promised on affordability and how much progress has been made. Markets may not react to every line of that speech, but when you combine affordability, tariffs, and fiscal questions, you're talking about the path of inflation, real wages, and ultimately what the Federal Reserve and bond market might have to do down the road. That's the bigger ecosystem these individual stock stories are swimming in. Before we wrap, let's hit a few under-the-radar watch list stories. These are not recommendations, just names and themes that could matter more if conditions line up. First, media and streaming M&A drama. MarketWatch reports that Paramount, through the Skydance structure, is looking to put itself in the driver's seat on a potential Warner Brothers Discovery deal with an increased bid and a key deadline hitting around midnight. This is the kind of late-night, high-stakes Hollywood finance crossover that can move not just the stocks involved, but the entire media and streaming complex, depending on how assets are valued and who ends up with what. Second, in fintech, PayPal's stock popped on renewed takeover hopes, with analysts suggesting, per MarketWatch, that private equity or strategic buyers might see more value than the current roughly $40 billion market cap implies. Even if no deal materializes, that kind of chatter forces the market to reevaluate what these mature digital payment platforms are worth in a world of slower growth but steady cash flows. Traders will be watching whether today's move has follow-through or proves to be just a rumor-driven spike. putting it together for tomorrow's setup. Watch how futures trade around any new tariff headlines or commentary from lawmakers. Keep an eye on crypto sentiment after the ETF outflow story. And stay tuned for any overnight M&A news in media and payments that could reset sectors at the open. The macro backdrop is all about policy clarity. The micro backdrop is about who can still grow, like Domino's, and who's losing momentum, like parts of Medicare Advantage. Remember, this is information and education, not personalized financial advice. As always, I'll be here to keep clarity through the chaos of these markets. On behalf of Stormstock Solutions, I'm Grant Mercer. Stay sharp